Hi everyone, we'll get started fairly soon. It's not quite 7, but I'd just like to say hello. It is 6 o'clock. Who have we got here? We have Councillor Goldstone, we have Councillor Hughes, Councillor Fraser, Councillor Little and Councillor Kosh. We do have a quorum. Excuse me. David, are we live on YouTube?
Yes, we are, Mayor Redmond.
Thank you. I think we'll get started. We have a quorum. Everyone knew it was 6 o'clock, didn't they? What have we got here? Hello, Cody. How are you, Councillor Davies? Welcome. So it's 6:01. I will get started. Welcome everyone to this special council meeting on the 14th of May. And this is all our meetings are important, of course, but it's particularly important in regard to our budget deliberations, but also as it relates to COVID-19. It is my pleasure to, we have a guest speaker this evening, Mr. Kevin Fisher. Kevin is a board member of the Board Business Development Group, and I invited a member from that group to address council with a very short presentation. So welcome, Kevin. Nice to have you with us. So I'll just go through the agenda, and welcome to anyone who's listening and viewing on YouTube this evening. I can't see you, but a warm welcome to you as well. Now I'll just walk us through our agenda. Firstly, the statement of acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge this land that we meet on tonight is the traditional lands for the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Yep, good. I know the previous meeting before I wasn't very loud. So welcome everyone, roll call. Now I don't have Councillor Tooley and I don't have Councillor Valalonga, and I don't have Councillor Shanks, but they may well join us. So we'll keep moving. If you can, and I just welcome staff, apologies, welcome Mr. Horde, who's very much involved with this finance space. Thank you for all your work. Paul Horde, who's the Manager of Finance of the Town of Gawler. Welcome the CEO, Henry Innett, CEO. Welcome Ryan Viney, who's the Manager of Development and Planning and Environmental Services. Welcome Ryan. Welcome Erin Finlay, who's in charge of Community Services, the library and everything in between, Erin. I also like to welcome Kate Symes, our Governance Officer, but also our Minute Taker. Welcome Kate, who keeps us on track. David Barrett, who's in charge of not only keeping us all on track here with our Zoom meetings, thank you David, but David is the Manager of Communications, Centre Operations, and lots of other things. IT, I think as well, David. Yeah, so you've got a big portfolio as well. I'd like to warmly welcome Mr. Peter Fairley-Jones and Peter Brass, who's just popped up on the screen. Peter are our independent members from our audit committee. Very much valued their expert advice, so we're beaming in and you're welcome to provide comment if there's questions from the elected members. Essentially observing tonight's proceedings, and of course we're going into an audit committee after this meeting, when this meeting is complete. Welcome, Councillor Shanks, just joining us. I'm just welcoming everyone. Haven't formally got into the business of the reports yet, and who have I missed? Have I missed anyone? And welcome, elected members, of course. Welcome. So. I don't have any apologies, but I did get a call from Councillor Vallelonga tonight. He wasn't sure if he was going to be an apology, but he was intending to declare an interest as a cafe owner. So I'll leave that for Jim if he does join us. If not, we'll put him down as an apology at this stage, Kate. I haven't heard from Councillor Tooley. I think Ian's the only one that hasn't joined us tonight as yet. Okay, so are there any motions to grant leave of absence, councillors? I can't see anybody putting up their hand, so we'll keep moving. Thank you. And I don't have any leave of absence on the books. We don't, while we're in electronic meetings, we don't have public open forum. Declaration of interest. Kate, I think we'll leave that blank at this stage, but certainly I'm not sure whether we note Councillor Vallelonga's on. Councillor Samble hasn't joined us yet. I'm sure they will. Councillor Vallelonga's apology, we might note that there, but I guess we'll wait and see how it goes. So I'll leave that one up to you, Kate. Thank you. So before we move into officers' reports, I am going to give you an update. I'd like to be able to give you an update of a meeting that I beamed into last night with the Premier. There were 113 mayors and CEOs zooming in to get an update from the Premier, and there were a couple of key messages. It was interesting to note that $43 million of investment has come from the local government sector in South Australia into their communities thus far as a direct result of COVID-19, and that's not all councils. That's councils have supplied their information. We did get a bit of a snapshot of the impact on Adelaide City Council, which is probably a $30 to $35 million impact as a result of their significant component of commercial properties in the CBD, which is something like 80% of their rate base. And it's about a $10 million per quarter impact for that particular council. Charles Sturt also provided some input. They believed that their impact was around 23 million. They've got a $110 million rate base. They're quite a large council. So it's not without its impact on local government. However, local government is still coming and putting themselves forward to assist. The Premier said that first of all, he thanked everyone for all their support. He thought that we were doing particularly well, and we are. We're leading the nation, I think, in our strategies. He talked about Japan, and he touched to a lesser extent on South Korea that have had a second wave after they lifted their restrictions and perhaps took their eye off the ball, and the devastating effect that it's had on their commercial sector as a result. So it's something he said to be mindful of as we work through these lifting of restrictions. He did talk about most children are back at school. Only 3.2% are not going to school in South Australia. So it's been a really good outcome for education, which is very different to, say, Victoria at the moment. He thanked councils for opening playgrounds and sporting training. He talked about the restrictions that are being lifted, three-stage process, a month apart, so we can see the effect of those changes. He talked about more packages coming. He talked about the Deputy Prime Minister announcing strategic roads grant funding in the next couple of days. That's Michael McCormack, that's federal funding. So watch out for that. We have 2 projects we've applied for in that funding round. So fingers crossed, let's hope we get something from there. And he also talked about more state packages coming via Minister Knoll directly for local government. So he didn't give us any indication of when that would be, but that is something to be mindful of. There was a lot of talk about opening up the restrictions for the long weekend. So as much as it's June the 8th, they were going to consider whether they bring that forward a bit so they can encompass the long weekend for businesses, and also a Northern Territory WA bubble with South Australia. They're considering that. He's also happy to continue talking and even do webinars with councils, but he may well send us a letter. If I do get a letter, I will circulate that. So that's just a bit of an update from that webinar, Zoom meeting that I joined last night that I thought went very well. So we'll keep moving. I'd like to formally welcome Mr. Kevin Fisher. Kevin, if you'd like to unmute yourself, if you can, I'll just unmute you.
Okay.
Go. And Kevin, welcome as a board member of the Gawler Business Development Group. If you'd like to, you have the floor for a few minutes to give a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Carol.
I can hardly hear you, Kevin. If you can move forward towards your mic.
Is that any better?
Yes, that is better. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone, elected members and members of staff. Look, it'd be a bit of an understatement to say that the Gawler Business Development Group are not extremely concerned about the impacts of the restrictions imposed by COVID-19, both their short-term impacts, which we are seeing every day, but also in the medium to long term, they will be far-ranging. And we also note some of the council's recent decisions in, talking to Mr. Horwood about its one-page application for rate deferment and for hardship and for various businesses that have been forced to close, and obviously for ratepayers as well. So just one of the 2 main things that we see in our submission is we're obviously looking for rate relief in the form of waiving of some fees. We note that that you already have and have applied what a lot of the businesses in the town have already been doing. They've already been in conversation with their landlords through the management agencies, and in a lot of cases, I'm not sure if if hopefully you've read the submission. We have a lot of cases where landlords have renegotiated the current lease fees, rental fees, I should say. Just to be clear, so a lot of councillors know or aware that well over 90% of lease agreements for commercial premises require them to be a rent plus all outgoings, which means that the business owner is responsible for the rates that councils have to pay, or sorry, that they have to pay to council. So obviously, and we've been able to determine that a lot of them have had rental relief in the form of 100% complete cessation of payment of rental fees for the period of their shutdown, right through to variations. Quite a few of those are linked, obviously, with income, and there will be an onus on that, and discussions occur between the agencies. So our concern as a board is we would like to see some of the deferment of that rates moved to a waiving, and the terminology we're using is waiving of some sort of rate fees. And obviously there would have to be criteria around that. And that is going to be some of the difficult thing. Looking at your recommendation for this evening, I note that there are a few comments I'd like to make about the particular recommendation. First, I've just got it up here. I'll just pull through. There is a few things. You reference a 2.4% CPI increase within your documentation. I've obviously that is a March figure, and I think the figure that we'll be looking at the end of June will be substantially different to that. However, that is in with council's purvey to review how they apply any particular rate increase going forward. But moving on to the item where we refer to the amount of money that would be, I think it's item 14, yes. Using those figures of 2.4% and just assuming council does decide to go ahead with that as a rate increase, we don't have a lot of comment about that from a board perspective, other than, of course, we believe the CPI figure will eventually be a lot lower. But moving on to the quantum of money used in that figure, and then the therefore calculation of how much money could be allocated to some sort of discretionary rate rebate fund, which, the terminology for me should be all about COVID-19. In other words, the specific circumstances that impact on businesses. Within that, I think that figure is, and the board believes that figure is not going to be anywhere near enough. But again, that would be up to the setting of criteria and the qualification that either a business or a ratepayer will have to be able to access that. So we just make general comment that that particular amount of money we think will have to be substantially more. So how that is funded, whether you, I just make a general comment that if you're increasing rates during these times, maybe the whole amount of that figure should be allocated to that. The second part of our discussion is you reference for the criteria that you reference within your motion, I believe, is your council's item 16, council's rate financial hardship policy. Now, that policy talks about ratepayers quite a bit throughout the document. And there's only one very small mention that might be referred to as waiving. I think it's item 2.2, referencing the authority to delegate to council staff the ability to do that. But other than that, there's a lot of references to ratepayers. And as I've explained before, previously, a lot of businesses don't own the premises they're in. They lease those premises and they are responsible for those outgoings. So the council rates are payable in almost every case by, if I'm going to use the terminology, non-ratepayer. They are a business owner and they have a substantial interest, obviously, in benefiting the town's economic and social well-being. So we would ask that the Gawler Business Development Group, that was probably the second thing that we would probably like to request, is that we are involved in a consultation or even in the implementation of any criteria for qualification for any rate relief. That rate relief, we believe, should be in the form of not just a waiver, but a deferral, but also a waiver. That is just one of the two things we ask. Clarification on the process. General comment also, which was various board members have looked at the $3.4 million package, and I'm hesitant to use the word disingenuous, but 3.4 million. There's only, if you're only allocating 250,000 of that currently, and I understand that councillors and elected members are to debate that and decide what that's going to be. But we would specifically ask for a fund that details perhaps businesses separately, and then ratepayers. But either way, whatever that fund is called, we think it should be increased. We also think that businesses should have a particular process to apply for a waiver of council rates, at least for the term that they're not perhaps operating. I could probably wax lyrically for a while, but I'll hand back to Karen to see whether any elected members have any questions in relation to the two main points and perhaps any questions for what the board has been doing. I may just take the opportunity to announce that we put aside a $20,000 budget, not dissimilar to the council, seeing that the possible impacts of this are to be wide-reaching. We put $20,000 aside for a business support package, which in essence was to try and allow businesses to access advice on what they could get in the form of federal government, state government, and other packages. The other thing we also did was we're running a profit improvement program, which we added 4 modules that are very specific to the impacts of COVID-19. So that is a large profit improvement program that we offer to all of our businesses free. And these 4 modules were added directly as a result of this. So that's something that we fund to the tune of $27,000 per year. And on top of that, we've put the $20,000 into the business support package. So yes. All right. So thank you, Karen.
That's all right. I'll open it up for questions, but just on JobKeeper, I was phoned by John Thorpe just before the meeting. He hasn't received JobKeeper. He's taken out a loan. I've since got in contact with Nick Champion's office, Rob Close, and John will be contacting Rob Close, and they're going to get onto that straight away. So some businesses have yet to receive what was promised on the 30th of March. So that's an issue, but I have reported that through to the federal member, who should streamline that money if people are eligible. So Kevin, you might want to feed that back through some of your businesses, and if they have any, if they're not receiving that money, they need to get on to. It is a good forum through Nick Champion's office to streamline and get sorted out very quickly, and they've promised me that they will do that. So questions, elected members. Now, Councillor Shanks, you have your hand up first, and I can't get it off for some reason. Oh, there we go. Sorry, Nathan, I'm fiddling with you. Try again.
All good. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Kevin. I really appreciate that. I just had a quick question. Just listening to you talk there, I'm getting the general sense that the deferral position that we're taking is actually a little bit worrying to businesses, I guess, that, you know, in 6 months' time, they're going to be up for double rates. What sort of feedback can you just sort of relay and probably repeat that businesses are feeling around that deferral opposed to the waiving?
Perhaps I can answer that, Bob. We've done a bit of a survey of, we've done over 150 businesses. It's an ongoing process. And part of the questions we've asked as to how many businesses, just to see the impacts, 19 have closed temporarily. We asked businesses how many have reduced their trading hours, and that was 68 of those businesses have reduced trading hours of the 150. Of that stood staff down, 250 staff have been stood down through the town, and there 50 of those have been let go. Of those, they were also asked how many were going to reopen. Now, 11, that seems like a rather small number, but maybe we're missing somebody. Unsure, asked how many of those businesses were unsure whether or not they would rebound to pre-COVID-19. And of those, that was 22 of about the 150. So it's a fair impact on there. And as I listed, there are some businesses that are not even, that they were closed from day one. If we talk about all the hotels in the town, closed overnight, loss of income, all of the jobs, and some of them are financially out of pocket because they're waiting for the very package that Karen referred to come through. They were expected to fund. Now, one of those business owners I was talking to was talking about $70,000 that he had to continue to pay while he waited for the relief packages to come through. So this is a market impact. So I don't know if I answered your question directly, Nathan, but certainly it's had an impact on a lot of businesses. Sorry, I should also add, but some businesses, a very small number of those maybe have also benefited from what's gone on. So we understand it is a two-way street, which is why the Gawler Business Development Group are happy to work with any sort of criteria to try and work our way through the minefield if council decides to put a fund aside. Thank you.
Did you have another question, Nathan?
Yeah, I did. I think you have answered that quite well, although there might be a small percentage that are actually benefiting from it. Obviously, a large percent of our businesses, I mean, the one I'm involved with, including, are taking a bit of a hit from it. Just a follow-up question. You've set aside a fund that you mentioned earlier. How did you go about that? What money is that coming from? What are your criterias? How did you come to the vote that was the right direction to be doing?
There was nothing too sophisticated about it, Nathan. I'm afraid to say we just allocated. We thought that what would businesses need at this time, and if you roll back a month, everything was uncertain. Businesses just closed, and they had no. We were getting all sorts of right through from emotional to business responses from people as we tried to contact them. So we allocated immediately $20,000, which was meant to be seen as a access to financial advice. Now, a lot of bigger businesses and smaller businesses all have their own accountants and contacted them, but we made sure that either those, and we used some of the B2B providers to give access. So anyone that we were contacting them, asked if they needed any help. It was up on our website and through various newsletters that we normally send out. So we just allocated $20,000 sort of overnight, and that was funded from, I think you'd probably be aware, elected members, we did have a surplus of funds from previous years that had not been allocated. And of course, with the recent cancelling of our business expo, that has, well, not cancelling, I should say, it was a deferral, but whether or not that that still happens in the future, we've had funds that we were able to allocate within our budget, which is part of what you would have seen with council reports. We did have a surplus. We've reallocated a lot of our budget.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Councillor Shanks, for those questions. So just on the JobKeeper, John Thorpe's taken out a loan to pay that while he waits for JobKeeper, which is just extraordinary, but that's what people are doing. So, okay, thank you, Kevin Fisher, for those insights and for your presentation this evening. You're welcome to hang around and listen in. Thank you. Now, elected members, we do have we will move on to officers' reports now. And that's on page 4 of our agenda for people tuning in. We do have an official agenda. You may find it on the council website. It is a public document. I'm sure those people that have it will have it in front of them. So that's on page 4. Councillor Hughes, now hang on, you have your hand up. Yes, Councillor Hughes, hang on, there we go.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation. I think that there's some extra wording. I've spoken to Paul Horwood tonight about having a follow-up workshop. So that's in yellow, and the rate remissions, I think is a term instead of waiving that Kevin Fisher's talking about, but also us looking at setting those parameters. And I think it's a really good idea to talk to the business development group in developing that workshop to actually how we put that rate remission package together so it does benefit the greater number. I think this is a really fair motion. We did originally sort of hold back $2 million to look at being able to maybe fund major projects, but I think this allows that $2 million to come back into play. It doesn't commit that $2 million yet to any specific projects, so that $2 million can be used for other rounds of stimulus packages from the federal and state governments. I'd like to see some stimulus for building projects, so tradespeople, whether that be fixing our sporting club rooms and things like that. But that $2 million that we are holding back isn't fixed. So that's something that's going to come back to us as councillors to allocate later on, which I think is fantastic. So overall, I think this is a really fair package that's been put together. It's something that we can work with over the next couple of weeks and months to sort of help our community get back on their feet. I agree, it's all of our community. So looking at a very small maybe rate increase, I think is fair at this stage, and noting that we're not setting our budget to later on anyway. But I think it's good to sort of flag what we are thinking with our community, which this motion does as well. So it sort of lets the community know that maybe at worst it may be a 1.2%, but it may be less as CPI, as Councillor, Mr. Fisher has sort of pointed out. It may be that CPI will definitely be a lot less than 2.4. It might be 2 or less. So it does flag that a lot smaller, but it also allows a lot of funds if we need them for rate remissions, and also understanding that at the moment I understand there's been about 60 ratepayers that have contacted council with deferrals, which may then look at rate remissions later on, which this motion allows. So yeah, I'm happy to move it.
Just a question, thank you, Councillor Hughes. Just a question on point 14. Mr. Fisher raised the issue around the hardship policy only mentioning ratepayers rather than businesses, and it might even be a question for Mr. Horwood. Ratepayers includes businesses. Yes, so that would cover businesses. Yes. Yes. I just wanted to make that clear for Kevin, because that was one point that he did raise. So I think that's been clarified, Kevin, that ratepayers includes business owners that pay rates on behalf of or to their landlord. So I think if we're comfortable with that. Now, Councillor Goldstone, you have your hand up.
Yeah, well, firstly, I just wanted to declare an interest. I think we skipped over that a bit. I've just got a perceived interest in this item. I will be staying in the meeting. It's due to my wife's past casual employment with the Kingsford Hotel. So I've given
apologies, Councillor Goldstone. We'll note that.
Yeah, I am happy to second the report. I'm allowed to speak.
Yes.
The recommendation. Can I speak to it now?
Yes, you can.
Having read the report several times and spoken to Mr. Horwood, I understand the rationale behind the recommendation. I understand the proposed general rate revenue increase based on CPI listed as 2.4%. I also understand that 50% of the rate revenue increase will be allocated for discretionary rate rebates for ratepayers who are incurring financial hardship as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Also follow that the net result will be a 1.2% increase in revenue. If I'm reading, if the recommendation is adopted, it should result in a fairer outcome. Those who are not financially affected by the pandemic will see no real change in rating other than a CPI increase. Sporting clubs, leaseholders, etc. will be looking at fees and charges being waived. Ratepayers affected by the pandemic, both business and residential, can apply for rate deferral and subsequent discretionary rate rebates. And council's long-term financial plans should remain intact. There's still questions, obviously, surrounding the discretionary rate rebate that presumably will be noted out at a future meeting, as hinted to in the, I think it's point 17 now of the recommendation. But some of the questions include, what percentage would the rebate be? I would suggest it would need to be sufficient enough to address the request contained in the correspondence that we've received. Would the rebate apply to current fourth quarter rate deferrals through hardship applications? How would how would the rebate be applied and when would it be applied and so on. So there's still a few questions that need to be resolved. I support the motion that Councillor Hughes has put up, on the understanding that the discretionary rate rebates will adequately accommodate businesses and residents who have been financially affected by the pandemic, and that deferred fourth quarter 2019-20 rates be considered for inclusion in the discretionary rate rebate parameters. So these issues in terms of the rate rebates really need to be nutted out, and look forward to that occurring at the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goldstone. So we're going to move in a second. Now, Councillor Davies, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So just a question. I just wanted to clarify, in terms of the wording of rebate being updated to remission, just wanted to clarify any differences or potential consequences of that.
Thank you. Good question, Mr. Horwood. And I'll thank you for putting the highlighting back up. I think that helps people understand the differences. Mr. Horwood, you have the floor.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Karen. Yeah, the rationale between, in the recommendations, the subtle change from discretionary rate rebates to remissions, at the end of the day, the ratepayer receiving the benefit would see no difference. It's just the reason why I'm proposing the subtle change is under Section 182 of the Local Government Act relating to remissions, there is considerably more flexibility for council in terms of setting the general criteria of those remissions, whereas under discretionary rate rebates under Section 166 of the Act, that is more prescriptive, and being conscious of what we're sort of grappling and dealing with, I think it's just appropriate to refer it as a remission such that there's more flexibility in the criteria and parameters that can sit around the provision of that rate reduction. That's the only reason we're proposing that change, Mayor.
Thank you, Paul. Now, Councillor Davies, does that address your question? Yep, thank you. Any other discussion? Councillor Shanks. You've got the floor, Nathan.
Yeah, look, the report is very, very detailed. I guess where I'm at on a personal level, and then also the conversations I've had with business owners, etc., that I know, I think it's very important that we show the hit we're taking in a simple way. And I'm glad that we are talking about changing the wording to a rate remission. I mean, my first question that I've got in my notes is an abatement change to a waive, only because we have local businesses taking a 30% hit, and that's what you need to take to be able to get the JobKeeper, by the way. So if you are getting that JobKeeper, that means you are showing a 30% minimum hit of your cash turnover. Now, if you're able to show that, it's very simply showing that COVID-19 has had an effect on your business. Now, I want to be able to get to a point where us as council can show and parallel, you know, we're here with you. We're taking this hit alongside of you, and we're supporting you the best we can while also keeping our local government in check. So although the report is very detailed and is running through, I would love to be able to see our actions again simplified. And after listening to Kevin Fisher and the conversations with the Gawler Business Development Group, I'd love to see a bit more collaboration with that to help them in moulding such a report. But yeah, look, it's a direction that we never thought we would have to be in as of January at the start of the year. So, you know, we're all flying a little bit blind. There's no point in throwing out accusations and everything like that. I think the more communication, the better on this one. So, yeah, that was just my comments on it anyway.
Thank you very much, Councillor Shanks. Now, I might pick up on that communication, and we had a Zoom meeting with the Gawler Business Development Group staff itself and the Gawler Business Development Group board members. Kevin, that was, when was that? Monday afternoon, I think it was. Yes, thank you, David. I can't remember what day it is. And that came up, didn't it, Kevin, about a one-pager of how to access various, and there was a real desire for council and the Gawler Business Development Group to work together on that. So certainly taking on board what your comments are, Councillor Shanks, around collaboration with the local business groups, particularly Gawler Business Development Group, and as a vehicle to communicate very effectively the support that we might be providing. So you're absolutely taking on board your comments. Any other discussion? I can't see any hands. Councillor Hughes, if there's no further, I'll ask you to just wrap up the debate. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to thank the staff for the detailed report and the actions. I think it is fairly innovative as a report goes, covering all of council's business in the motion, and also sort of helping to map out work that's going to happen in the future, which is really important. So I think this motion allows that all to keep proceeding, and it does allow us a lot of flexibility, and also I think it will be really fair, and especially if we can nut out some the rate remissions, working with the business development group and other ratepayers in the town, and this workshop will probably be in the next couple of weeks, so it's something that we'll be able to work on in the future. And I think it's great that we will have the capacity to look at other stimulus that the federal and state government provides as well, with the council having funds to help with those projects. So I think this motion covers a lot of areas and sort of helps position council for future actions to help our whole community. So I think it's quite fair. Thanks.
Thank you. The debate is closed. I'd like you to vote now, councillors. Click yes for voting for, and click cross or red to vote against. Okay, so I think everyone has voted. Let's have a look. Yep, that is carried. That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, elected members. Now we'll just complete our agenda. Moving down to, excuse me, I was hoping to do everything electronically, but I've failed. Are there any questions without notice, elected members? There be none. Are there any motions without notice? There be none. Close the meeting at 6:42. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, everyone.
Yeah.
Have a good evening, Kevin, and elected members.